Continue our discussion about array. Now we are going to talk about array two-dimension. Two-dimensional array is called an array of array. Is an array that store others array. The number of array contained within the array is defined upon declaration. The number of items in each internal array is also defined upon declaration. Two-dimensional array example. This example shows an array of two arrays with three elements in each array. A two-dimensional array can be visualized as a table with rows and columns. The example below has two rows and three columns. To create a two-dimensional array, add each array within its own set of curly brackets. Components of two-dimensional array are data type, variable name, and array size. Declare a two-dimensional array, use either of the syntax example below. The first example is declare array using two lines of code. The second example is declare array using one line of code. Declaring a two-dimensional array example. Identify the three components in the following primitive data type example. Declaring a two-dimensional array example. When declaring a two-dimensional array, the number in the first set of brackets, for example, 2, is the number of array that container holds or rows. The number in the second set of brackets, for example, 3, is the number of elements in each of those array or column. Another way to declare my array may look like this. Declaring a two-dimensional array example. Your friend bought you 3 of each type of flower, and each of the 3 flowers are different color. A single-dimensional array makes it tedious to keep track of this data. A two-dimensional array allows you to store 6 arrays, one for each flower type, and have each array store the color of each of the 3 flowers. The following code declares an array that holds 6 arrays, each of length 3. Initializing a two-dimensional array. Two-dimensional array, just like single-dimension array, can be initialized using two different methods. Method 1, I is the index of the internal array row and j is the index of the element within that array or column that is being initialized as shown on the code below. The output will be like this. Method 2, declare and initialize all array and all element within those array in the same line of code. However, you must know the value that you want the array to contain to initialize the array at the same time that it is declared. As example, you can refer to the code below. Using the method 1, the first number after the variable name is the index of internal array, and the second number is index of element within the internal array. Using second notation to initialize the array. Since we already know the content of the array for our bucket, use the second notation to initialize the array. Recall that the order is rose, sunflower, daisy, dandelion, violet, then lily. This flower will represent by the index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The two-dimensional array is represented as below. Visualizing a two-dimensional array. Lining up the value during initialization help to keep track of how data is organized in a two-dimensional array. In the code example below, notice how the second form is easier to visualize. Accessing data in a two-dimensional array. To access data in a two-dimensional array, you must know first, the index of the array to access. Second, the index of the content in that array to access. Accessing data in a two-dimensional array example. For example, to access the color of rose in my bouquet, use the index of the rose array 0 and the index of the first color 0. Review the previous array initialization. What will display in the console screen after the following code is executed? Solution. The first one is peach rose and the second one is white lily. Accessing the length of two-dimensional array. Length is an instance variable defined by the size of each declared array. Two-dimensional array have two different lengths. First, length of the outer array. Second, length of the internal array. The length of the outer array, which is the length that describes the number of array contained or row, is accessed like a typical array. The length of the internal array, which is the length that describes the number of elements each array contains column, is accessed using the following notation. Brackets tell the program that it is accessing the length of the internal array, and row says which array. Review this code. Which of the following is not true? Can you identify which one has improper syntax for accessing the length? 2.length equal 3 is false, and 4 0.length equal 5 is not valid syntax. Just like single-dimensional array, two-dimensional array can store any type of object. How can we organize the student in a classroom into three groups with 5 students per group as an array? Answer. Declare a two-dimensional array that holds three arrays, one for each group. Each array stores 5 students. A class called student has been defined, which has a constructor that takes in the student's first name. The following code declares the array that stores the group of students. Given a string array containing name of the 15 students in the group, how could you perform the following tasks? First, iterate through the existing array. Second, create a new student for each provided name. Third, place each student into one of the three groups. You already know how to iterate through the array using a for loop. And you also know how to create a new student for each name inside loop. How to place the student in the two-dimensional array using a nested for loop. A nested for loop is a loop inside a for loop. It can be used to iterate through two-dimensional array using the outer for loop counter as the index for the array rows and the inner for loop counter as the index for the element of each array or column. Consider the following two-dimensional array declaration. To iterate through the array and initialize each student as temp, use nested for loops as shown below. I keeps track of the rows, J keeps track of the column. How could we complete all three tasks? First, iterate through the existing array. Second, create a new student for each provided name. Third, place each student into one of the three groups. Here the sample of the solution from the previous question.